The old farmhouse stood on Honeysuckle Hill. It had seen better days. Paint peeled from its walls, the porch sagged a little. But it was home to Mary Ann, Rick and Ian.
Mary Ann, the eldest, was 15, practical and responsible.
12-year-old Rick, the middle child, had a nose for trouble. And then there was 9-year-old Ian, always curious, always getting into something. Summers on the farm were usually filled with lazy days and firefly-lit nights. This summer, however, was different. A strange tension hung in the air, thick and heavy like the humid July air. The bees were different. The bees had always been part of the farm. Their gentle hum was a familiar summer sound. But now their buzzing was different. It was louder, more insistent, almost angry.
Mary Ann noticed it first. The bees seemed larger, their stripes more pronounced. Their buzz was a low drone that vibrated in her teeth. She felt a shiver crawl down her spine, a feeling that something was very wrong. Did the bees always sound so angry? She asked Rick one morning. Her breakfast lay forgotten on the table.
Rick, who had been trying to teach himself to whistle, shrugged. "They're just bees, Mary Ann," he said. But even he couldn't ignore the way the hair on the back of his neck stood on end when the bees were near.
Ian, however, was fascinated by the bees. He would spend hours watching them, his nose practically touching the hive box Grandpa had built.
"Don't get too close, Ian," Mary Ann warned him repeatedly, her voice tight with worry. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong.
One sweltering afternoon, Grandpa, who usually tended the bees, fell ill. He lay in bed, his face pale and sweaty, mumbling about the bees.
"Gotta check the barn," he rasped, his voice weak. "Something's not right."
The barn was off limits. It was old, rickety, and home to Grandpa's beekeeping equipment. But with Grandpa sick and their parents away in the city, the responsibility fell on Mary Ann.
"We have to see what's going on," she said to her brothers, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart.
Rick, never one to back down from a challenge, grabbed a flashlight. "Let's go."
Ian, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement, trailed behind them. The barn door creaked open like the mouth of a monster, releasing a musty, sweet scent. It smelled of honey and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The inside of the barn was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs and forgotten farm tools. Light filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, casting eerie shadows that danced as they moved.
"What is that?"
As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, they saw it. In the far corner, bathed in a shaft of dusty sunlight, was the beehive. But it wasn't like any beehive they had ever seen before. It was enormous, stretching from floor to ceiling, pulsating with an eerie internal light. It wasn't made of wood or wax, but of a strange translucent substance that shimmered like amber.
"What is that?"
Ian whispered, his voice barely audible. As they moved closer, they heard a low humming coming from the hive. It was the buzzing of the bees, amplified 1,000-fold, vibrating through the floor and into their very bones.
Grandpa said the bees were different. He didn't say they were building a spaceship.
Mary Ann felt a chill crawl down her spine. She couldn't explain it, but she knew with a certainty that made her heart pound that they were in terrible danger. As if sensing their presence, the buzzing from the hive intensified. The air around them thickened, filled with a strange, sweet scent that made their heads spin. Suddenly, a swarm of bees erupted from the hive, their buzzing a deafening roar. These weren't ordinary bees. These bees were larger, their stingers dripping with a thick, viscous fluid that shimmered in the dim light. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their buzz vibrating in their skulls, making their thoughts jumbled and strange.
"Run!"
Mary Ann screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of the bees. They turned to flee, but the bees were everywhere. They swarmed around them, their buzzing a deafening drone that seemed to paralyze their limbs. Rick swatted at the bees, but they just kept coming, their buzzing growing louder, more insistent. He stumbled and fell, his hand landing in a puddle of that strange, syrupy liquid on the floor.
"It's like glue."
He cried, struggling to get up. He was right. The air itself seemed thick and sticky, making it hard to move, to breathe.